What is consciousness? It's perception. Consciousness is awareness, perception.
Admit or face just how dark of a place humanity has come to. And to do so means that certain influences in the world must be acknowledged.
You have no power over me.
Cool. Hello, this is Chris Jansen with endevil.life. End Evil podcast is meant to work on the ideals and principles of truth and freedom. Sitting here with me today on the internet is Chill Will Keller from 93 Phoenix is his website. How are you doing today, Will?
Hey, what's up, brother? I'm doing great, man. Thanks for having me on.
You're welcome. You know, we were having this conversation last week, kind of talking about some of the rough things that you and I have been going through, and some close friends that we know of, in dealing with relationships in this time. And it sparked this idea that we should have a conversation we could share with others.
Absolutely. Yeah, what a great topic, especially given the current circumstances, the energies that are going on right now. And yeah, definitely an important topic. And that conversation we had was excellent. And I know we were like, all right, we have to do an episode. We got to get this out there because I would bet that a lot of people are going through all different type of scenarios. But with the change that's going on right now, it's good to communicate these kind of these propositions and ideas.
Yeah, it's really bringing things out into the open. You know, when I was looking forward to chatting with you, but I didn't want to dump on you all my problems, you know, but as soon as I started mentioning, you know, here's some of the issues I'm dealing with, it was super obvious that you were right on the same page and you had similar things you wanted to talk about. And then we started talking about other people and we're like, man, this is big right now. I think from the quarantine to the COVID stuff, the police state stuff, the protest, racism issues, all this is kind of bringing a lot of feelings to the surface. And I think that's going to cause a lot of division especially between couples and husband and wife situations. And that's kind of what I was hoping to address.
Yeah, no, you're right. It's the year 2020. So vision, everything's being laid out on the table. Belief systems, false axioms, and that creates division within couples and relationships and family and friends. So yeah, it's definitely crucial.
One thing I kind of took a couple notes while I was sitting at lunch today on a break, and I was thinking, you know, I mean, it's always difficult for anybody in a relationship, but I think who I especially want to speak to are folks like yourself and myself who also are the children in the mix. I think a relationship that involves children is like a whole nother level of issues because when you start having relationship issues, it's not just about you and your loved one. It's about or your spouse. You know, it's also about how's this going to affect the kids or the family. You know.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's a great point because, you know, with the trials and tribulations that I've personally been through, you want to do everything for your child or your kids, but yet you have to look out for yourself as well because you got to be mentally and emotionally stable. And so it's kind of like you have to have the whole package. It's really a dance, and it can be tedious. It can be frustrating. It can be great, but you know, it's definitely a process.
Well, being a parent is definitely one of the most humbling experiences I've been through in life. It constantly forces you to reevaluate your decisions and going through feelings of guilt, feelings of Am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing? I think all parents wonder and ask themselves, like, how am I supposed to know what to do in this situation? And you can read a book and that could tell you one thing. You could talk to someone, they'll tell you something else. But there's no one answer to most questions you face as a parent. You have to search within yourself ultimately. And we're going to make mistakes, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think the root cause for everything is knowing yourself, and also knowing how the laws of nature operate, because that's kind of like that's your operating system, right? It's based in objective truth and morality, and then you can go from there. um, and that can go for relationships as well. If you have two people that don't know themselves through and through, and don't really know how things operate, it can get really messy. Especially this time period that we're going through, where you might have a couple where one person jumps on the bandwagon for something and the other person is the opposite. So the polarity, the polarizing effect in society right now is intense, and that macro to micro trickles down into individuals and relationships.
Yeah, like whatever problems were there before, this is going to put a microscope on it or a magnifying glass.
Oh yeah, for
And
sure.
my experience is, even as evolved as a person as you might be, or I might be, anyone, uh, there's still going to be those times in the day when you're not in the best shape or you're not prepared, and you get blindsided. I've had this happen so many times, especially considering my wife and I both work, full time, very intense types jobs. She's a nurse. I'm in construction. So, a day like that can be like in battle, like you're getting home from battle basically, and you want to, relax and put your stuff down, and they're your spouses, and they have some demand or complaint, and it just catches you off guard, and you
Yeah.
say the wrong thing, and then that balloons and turns into something else. Next thing you know, you're at each other's throats.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think most of us can relate to that.
So yeah, even with, even understanding deeper issues, I spend a lot of my time thinking about philosophy and truth and what's right and wrong. That's my focus. But that being said, I still make some huge mistakes, and sometimes I have to humble myself and apologize, for, even if I was saying the right thing. Sometimes saying the right thing in the wrong way at the wrong time is a mistake.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know during these times it's tough too, because mainly what I'm talking about is people that are the seekers of truth and knowledge. And once you have that desire, it's a desire for change and to be better. But there still has to be that balance if someone's in the family dynamic or in a relationship, and these times can be tough if there's an imbalance, meaning one person is not on that level. And we talked a lot about that in our previous conversation. And I think, and just talking with people in this community a lot, I feel there's a lot of people that are kind of going through the rocky times with that in context.
Definitely. And that, I think, is, I've been wanting to address that issue for many years, actually, because for me, when I first came to certain realizations, I think from my wife's point of view, I might as well have been going a little crazy. She sees this big change happening. This isn't the same person who I married, basically. Yeah, I've heard that statement several times.
Mm.
And yeah, I have gone through these major changes and come to these huge realizations that have caused me to start making changes in my life. And it really forces the issue with my wife, where I can't expect her to come along with me on this journey. Uh, I wish it would be that way, but as I'm the person who respects that every person needs to have their own choice, freedom of choice.
Hmm.
And I also have to recognize that on my journey, when I was 10 years ago, I didn't come to the realizations that I have now. So um, it's a difficult process to recognize that we're not on the same journey, you
Yeah.
know, and
Yeah.
that would be the best, but it's just not the case.
Yeah, and I think that's a common situation with a lot of people. It's everyone's on their individual path. I think one bonus, well, not really bonus, but one benefit with being in that type of situation as I am as well, is that it will allow you to focus on the teaching ability. Um, you and I are both teachers of natural law and truth and this type of information. So being in a relationship like that where, the people aren't on the same level, it can you can use that to your advantage and to influence with, through communication and information, and allow you to kind of sculpt your teaching capabilities, if that makes sense.
It does, but I would say on the other side of that coin, one of the major difficulties I've gone through is I'm always practicing in my head when I'm driving to work, when I'm talking to people at break. I'm always practicing my delivery of how I teach, how I try to plant the seeds of curiosity in people around me. And that drive in me is so strong that it can be overwhelming to people that live with me, not only my wife, but my kids, because they get it in the most raw form. And sometimes I've come to recognize it's kind of not fair to them in a way that, they're always like, you're giving us a speech, and anytime I start turning on that certain voice and I go past 2 or 3 sentences, their ears are all going to close, because it's just like, oh, here comes dad, here comes Chris with another one of those speeches. And I do
Yeah.
have to respect that it's not fair for me to expect them to be my audience anytime I need an audience.
Yeah. No, I can totally relate to that. I've learned over the years, that's for sure, from my own mistakes. You can't, like you said, you can't force someone to be the seeker. Um, and I think in extreme cases in relationships, um, it can be too opposite, where where somebody, we're talking about levels of consciousness. So once you start to transcend and move up the levels and change, you're going to be a different person. And sometimes in relationships that can be tough.
Well, especially if, the recognition comes that this is something that we discussed when we were talking about the spiritual journey. Once I came to the realization that there are principles that are far more important than me or my wants in my relationship or even my family. Freedom is much bigger than me or me and
Hmm.
my family, and that might require at some point for me to choose the greater good. And for someone who doesn't see things who hasn't learned to see that truth, it comes across as all this crap that you're into is more important than us, you know?
Yeah.
And that's a hard pill to swallow. I haven't found a way to translate that. Or there are times when I talk about truth and I'm saying, this isn't my opinion. This is absolute truth. There is such a thing. And that comes across from my wife's perspective, for instance, as, no, that's your opinion,
Yeah.
and that's not an
Yeah.
easy bridge to cross, because I do recognize that, like, I have the ability to see it from her perspective, how that would seem if I were in her shoes.
Hmm.
In fact, I had a good little life brings you these little things to remind you. I was having a conversation recently with someone who is very religious in Baptist type religion, and he was giving me these like revelation style prophecies that here's what's going to happen in the future. You know, a third of the population is going to die of pestilence, type of thing.
Mm.
And I'm listening to this thinking, boy, I can see where, from someone like my wife's perspective, when I talk, it could come across that way as some crazy preacher, right?
Yeah.
And they might shut down without actually hearing the information. So now, beyond what our normal relationship issues are, there's this whole other thing where, I care about something that, from her point of view, is out there, woo woo,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you've experienced anything like that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, for sure. Um, and I don't know if I have the answer to that for that. Honestly, I've been searching for it myself, but what I came to conclusion is that, um, principles, first things first. Principles come first, and you
no,
know,
no one said the growing process was going to be easy or not painful.
oh yeah,
And I
oh, for
think
sure.
what I've had to realize several times in the last month or two is it might cost me the things that are most dear to me, including my own physical body. If I stand up for my principles in a time like this, it may well be that I have to give up anything or everything. And if I really stick to what I know to be true, I have to be willing to make those sacrifices and be
Yeah,
consistent.
absolutely. I agree 100%. And they stepping onto that path and having the courage to walk it, uh, you know, definitely recognized in the universe. It's when someone's off the path, they all these obstacles start coming up, and I see those as signs when that happens. And then when you get the clear message, sometimes you got to jump and act. Um, and I know that to be true in my personal life for sure. But I think when it comes down to being in a relationship with love and morality and principles go hand in hand. There's the polarity of love, and this is something that I wanted to talk about with you as well, is that especially with everything's coming to the surface nowadays, there's two types of love in a relationship. There is, let's just say, dark and light. One of them is evolving for the good, and one of them is the involution, right? It's degrading at all times. And I think those can intermingle at different points depending on change in the individual. So, self-sacrifice is definitely part of the process, um, in my opinion.
And when you look at it from the bigger perspective, and sometimes I have to really ask myself, is what is really best for all involved? If I take out my immediate needs and wants is more a better word than needs. When I take away my wants, things I want, and my desires, my hopes for the way things could be, and just look at what's best for all involved. Well, what's best for all involved is if I do a really good job of my role as a male, as a father, and a husband, even if that means that my family doesn't want to be around me anymore because they don't like the way things are going, because the way society's changing and the way I'm reacting to it. But if I'm consistent in what I'm teaching, that will mean more in the long run than me holding on to my desires and wants, which are sacrificing principles.
Yeah, Absolutely. Well said. I think the key to love and to a healthy relationship or even a healthy individual is transcending those base desires, that base level of consciousness. And so, and the good old saying, be the change. And I have a buddy that, I'm not gonna say his name. He doesn't even live near me, and we fell out of touch, but he would always talk the talk on relationships and within his own relationship, but yet he would do the complete opposite. And that's the that corrupt love. And that's another thing too. What's coming out is the narcissistic tendencies are coming out in relationships. And I'm not referring to mine at all, but well, yeah, maybe a little bit. Shit's coming out.
Yeah.
And it's coming to the surface. And that can test an individual, especially if they're on the path to truth and self improvement and stuff. It can really test you. And but yeah.
I think one thing what we do have going for us, I feel like I got going for me. In my case, I've been married for 18 years. And as much as one thing I say could really get on my wife's nerves, or how I react in a certain situation could make her feel scared, you can't take away the fact that I've been showing up every day for 18 years and been loyal and always stuck to my commitment. And whenever the child fell down, I was there to give her a kiss. Whenever my daughters needed me, I was there. And I'm feeling pretty confident in that even if things didn't go perfect from here on out, my track record speaks for itself. And I think there's really three main things I think about a relationship that are key. And besides knowing yourself, you hit the nail on the head. That's the first one. But the other three I thought of were faith, trust, and commitment. And I think it's kind of in that order. Faith is something that is often confused because of cultural religions. But the way I see faith is, I like the way that Jeremy Locke put it in The End of All Evil, but he described it as the way a baby takes its first steps. When you take your first steps, you don't know if you're going to fall down, but you have faith in yourself that if you do, you're going to get back up, or that things are going to work out. And so there is this leap of faith,
Yeah.
in the beginning, when you first meet someone, when you first get together with someone, when your relationship changes, you have to offer some faith. You have to take this leap of faith. And then once you do, and the person sees that, oh, I took this leap of faith and the person caught me, the person was there for me, my spouse, keeps showing up. Well, that builds trust. Trust isn't something you get all at once. It's something you build a step at a time, just like a baby's taking these steps. And once the baby's taken thousands of steps, the baby has faith in itself and it can stand up, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And if you keep proving that trust over and over, then you prove your commitment. But maybe in a way, commitment isn't right to put last there, because for me, it began when I decided to get married. I made a commitment and I've stuck to it. And that has to do with honesty. I don't know. How would you put commitment in there?
I think commitment in a relationship, especially a marriage, you're committing to each other for unity and growth. We're individuals, and I believe a healthy balance in a relationship, meaning that two people are going to be at two different levels of spirituality. Some people don't even consider themselves spiritual, but yet they're still a spiritual being. They're just kind of bankrupt in that category. But having the commitment is, committing to the growth process. meaning that over the years, things are going to change, right? Change is constant, and you're committing to being there for one another through those changes, whether it's good or bad. Um, I think with the cultural, with just culture nowadays, there's the lack of knowing yourself, and that trickles down to a whole bunch of other issues with communication. And well, I mean, it's almost a fail right there if you don't truly know yourself, because then you can't communicate that well. But so for me, commitment in the short is committing, is trusting, and faith to me is trust, trust in the higher order, the process. Um, so it's committing to the growth process, that, hey, babe, we're going to change. We're going to change throughout the years, but we're going to go hand in hand.
And I guess what sparked in me when you were saying that was you have to keep recommitting. The
Yeah,
original
man.
commitment was one thing, but every day over these 18 years, I have to keep and I can remember like a really bad argument when I walked away just furious, flaming mad, and just walking down the street with no destination in mind, almost feeling like maybe I'm never going to go back. And by the time I get around a couple blocks, kind of thinking, okay, once I get past my own little flare up of emotions I'm dealing with, again, that question, what's best for all, and my commitment to this person is to love her no matter what. And that
Yeah.
means, okay, let's just say we can't stand being around each other anymore. I've become the way I am now makes her feel ill, um, or vice versa. And it seems like the best thing we don't spend time together. Does that mean I don't care and love for this person anymore? No, I'm still committed to always being there for this person that I promised, that I made a commitment to, as long as this person does not become harmful to me or others,
Yeah.
and there's no way you can spend that much time with somebody and not see that, if you're not paying attention. I don't know how people come to a realization after being with someone many years that all of a sudden they're not anything like what they thought they were, unless they're not paying attention at all. I mean, if you're spending day to day with your spouse, you should know what this person's about. If you don't, you're not paying attention, because it's all there. They either show up when they say they're going to show up and do what they say they're going to do, or they don't.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Well, I think that's a good point. That's, we look at society, and, you know, um, like instant love, is what is the majority, the ideology that, people are subscribing to nowadays. It's instant results, instant satisfaction, and instant love. That's why there's so many marriages, and I think it's like 60%. It might even be higher, end in divorce. And there's a process before marriage, and then there's almost a separate process after marriage. And all those points that you said would be the after marriage, but I think it's important, um, for people to engage and go through that process before they get into a serious relationship, and that is the process of self mastery, of knowing yourself through and through, um, and know how the world works. Right? I think these are
That's
crucial topics.
tricky because, I can, a little reflection, a little personal reflection, because of growing up with all these movies I've seen and television, I had this very particular ideal in my head of the type of woman, how she would look even,
Mm,
and I really went through some struggles, you know, uh, between 18 and my early 20s, of having to really look at myself and be like, what are you doing? It's like, life is not a Disney movie. You're gonna you want to stick with someone who has good qualities as a person, not someone who looks like a Disney princess. But I
yeah.
really had to fight that, you know, because it kept coming up in my. I was so programmed that I had to actually fight my own self to say, it's not about, superficial things. It's not about looks, it's about how someone cares for you,
Yeah,
And that's just
absolutely.
one example. Disney teaches you that, like you're saying, you're just going to fall in love. Everything's going to be perfect. And a lot of people go into life with this expectation, and expectations are exactly one of the main things that screw us up. Instead of being in reality, we're living towards this future ideal or possible expectation that we would have in our head, and it doesn't align with what's actually happening.
100%. And that this has been implanted in people since they were kids. The great example is the Disney effect, right? Um the princess
Happily ever
status.
after, right?
Exactly. And it's same thing as, with the parental figures in the Disney movies, right? There's always a mom or a dad that dies in the movie. It's so they're subconsciously programming children for these kind of traumas, and what to look for, what qualities and stuff. It's just base consciousness, right? It's just keeping people connected to the ego and connected to um, um, just desires and base emotions.
Right,
There's
the
no
lower brain.
spiritual. Exactly. The reptilian brain. And yeah.
But
So
one thing that having kids does is, as hard as you try, kids will rock you out of that. You know, Anybody I know that's being a parent has a little bit more knowledge about selflessness than someone who doesn't, because having a kid forces you at times to sacrifice what you want or how you used to live, you know,
yeah.
in the same way that moving in with somebody or getting married to someone does. You realize, oh, when I was single, I could just leave my shoes wherever I wanted. But now that I'm married, I have to put them in the closet. Um,
Oh, absolutely.
I used to just wipe my counter off when I felt like it. Now I have to do it every time we eat. It's like you do have to change, and you have to give things up. And I used to go mountain biking or snowboarding every weekend, and now I got a kid. I can't go for a year or 2 years, 3 years at a time. You do have to give things up, which is a really good exercise. And it's nature's built in, one of nature's built in spiritual processes to teach us, right?
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah, no, I remember even before I had my daughter in my life, I knew I would be a dad, and I was excited about that. Didn't know when, but then I knew once I became a dad, my life was over.
Yeah.
Meaning that everything would change, and I would be 100% devoted to my kid. Right. And I have friends now that don't have kids, and they're like, they never want to have kids because they're openly
Afraid.
stating that they're afraid because they're too selfish. It's like,
Yeah.
so, and I try to stay in the student teacher um, mentality with my daughter. Right. I learned
You're being the
so
student,
much.
right?
Exactly. Yeah, me being the student, because I learned so much from her. It's incredible, but I'm learning about myself through
Yep.
through her.
Yeah.
So it's
There's nothing worse than one of those moments when you realize you've just gotten too mad and yelled at a little kid who's innocent.
yeah,
And you think to yourself, that's not a creative way to deal with the situation. That's me blowing off steam or using my power, in a unbalanced way, in an unfair way. This is innocent little child. You see them look at you with those little eyes and cry. You really feel like shit,
oh yeah, no, for sure,
And it's bound to
definitely.
happen. It's like I said, it's a built-in process.
Yeah, and this all ties in with relationships as well. The cultural dynamic is set up so it literally passes down through the generations the same um, dogma and cultural bullshit. So you have to break that cycle, and do it. Engaging into the spiritual journey, and self mastery is extremely important for being a parent, for in a relationship, for yourself.
You know,
Self-sovereignty.
I don't want to use it as an excuse, but that does bring to mind the fact that there are a lot of things in our culture that have purposefully broken down the family unit. You know, there was a time, or there still are places where communities work together more. So I've always thought about the fact that little kids do really well with grandparents, for instance.
Mm.
And if you had a community like a tribe, for instance, where there's activities going on, a kid could run around and go, say, hang out with the teenagers for a little while, or could go hang out with the grandparents while the mother and father are doing the day-to-day business of work, and they don't have to be bothered with the kids because they're trying to get the work done, right?
Mm-hmm.
But one thing we always faced in our relationship was my wife and I didn't really have extended family. We never had somewhere to take the kids, you know. We were always we had to be on cue all the time. There was no one to go drop them off with. You know, it took us a long time to even just find a babysitter. I remember the first time we found a babysitter, it was a really big deal. So,
Yeah.
you know, many years went by where we did lose ourselves. And now that the kids have become teenagers, it's a really odd thing. There's this extra space where you're like, whoa, what do I do with myself now? You know, I have to reinvent myself.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But I mean, I got off topic there, but the point I was making is that our culture, our society, there's a lot of really destructive things that have happened that break down that whole community. And it, you know, some people say it takes a whole tribe or a whole community to raise a child, and we're trying to do it by ourselves, which is really hard for a couple in this day and age.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's the that's the natural way, right? Community. And it's the family dynamic. I was blessed enough to have a huge family, so my family dynamic was excellent. And my dad told me something. He said, "Son," this is right when my daughter was born. He said, "Son, I'm going to break it down to you. When it comes to parenting, you're just going to do your best. But just remember of all the things that you didn't like as when you were a kid, and make those things better for your child." So, it's just an upgrading process. And I like that. It resonated with me, and I'm like, all right, cool. And it hit home. It hit
Yeah, I
home
could do
just to
that.
constantly be better, because times are changing. And my grandpa and great grandpa were, it's different time, way different time. And they were pretty rough on their kids. And so yeah, just we do it better.
One thing I thought we could talk a little bit about is I've found one pretty valuable tool, and I've just recently started trying to introduce it to the family. We actually had some family meetings trying to deal with some of our issues, you know. And I brought a printout of this, what's called nonviolent communication, as a way to deal with conflict.
Excellent.
Nonviolent communication was this whole idea is kind of drawn up by Marshall Rosenberg, and I haven't studied it as deeply as I would like, but what I have found is a simple it's not really acronym, OFNR, which is observations, feelings, needs, and requests. And I mostly use it for my own self as a tool when I feel like I'm in conflict with my wife, for instance. And a good way to do this is to go for a walk, just get out in the night air and go through these steps: observations, feelings, needs, and requests. First, I'm thinking about what I observe is happening. Try to define that. And just that process alone is huge. Sometimes it seems really basic, it seems really straightforward, but if you do it in your mind in an organized way, what is my observation? What's really happening here? Be able to describe it. My observation is when I come in the house at this time and talk about this thing, this is what happens, you know? Okay, so then the next step would be, what feeling does that create or bring about, like really define that feeling. And sometimes it's tough. Sometimes I'm kind of going back and forth. Am I mad or am I sad? You know?
Yeah.
But going through that process of trying to figure it out, which one is it, or is it more one than the other, maybe a little of both, is rewarding. By the time you've now, you know, said, this is the observation, this is what I see happening, this is how I'm feeling when it happens, then you can start looking at what the needs that aren't being met are. And I can look at my own needs, you know, and I can look at my wife's needs, what I understand to be her needs. And a lot of this I can do in my own mind, like on a long walk, you know.
Mm.
And what I try to do in the end through the walk is formulate a request. The last step is, what would I actually ask her in a reasonable way that I actually think could change, something she might be able to actually do that would help me feel like I'm better, my needs are being met. And I'll tell you what, by the time I go through those 4 steps, when I've had tough arguments, I come back with so much more clarity. And I have been able to diffuse some pretty bad arguments and deal with my own emotions just by thinking my way through those 4 things.
Yeah, that's great. And I have seen other documents like this that were just described in different ways, but it's a great format. And this is something that people, could use in their relationships, because I think there's a lack in communication and expressing oneself. And everything, not everything, but a huge flaw in relationships, especially this time, is that people are emotionally reactive.
Mm-hmm.
And when you have a format like this, really breaks it down and saves a lot of the aggressive conflict, and you're getting to the causes, the root issues, and making progress. So that's awesome.
I think, yeah, one of Rosenberg's main things is that we all have needs, and that is basically what causes crisis is when our needs aren't being met. When you look at the root of all these problems, someone's needs aren't being met. And
Yeah.
so if we can find a way to meet the needs for both parties, and this is the core of most mediation, if you were to go to professional mediation, this is a pretty common process. And the other 2 main things are really taking claim of your emotions. And this has helped a lot in our household, is to recognize that there's a really common tendency for people to say, oh, you make me feel like this, or it's your fault I got mad, it's because you
Mm-hmm.
did this, that's why I had to get mad. And
Yeah.
once we recognize that that is an incorrect way to go about things, it's never going to work. It's never going to meet the needs of anybody to blame somebody else for how you're feeling. It's your feeling. The feeling is the reaction to the situation, so
Yeah.
it's nobody's fault but your own if you're having a feeling. However, that doesn't mean that someone isn't doing something harmful or hurtful to you. And that's you defining your boundaries and making a request, or making a line in the sand sometimes might be the next step. If you're already beyond the request stage where, okay, I can't take this anymore. If this keeps happening, I'm going to do this, and it sucks when it gets to that point, because then that's when the guns come out, basically, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And things get drastic. But if you can keep it from getting to that point, a lot of times both parties' needs can be addressed. And to me, this process and being able to do this in a relationship is so important, because I believe in anarchy. And anarchy involves all of us working together, not relying on some other government entity to come solve our problem for us. That would mean that we would have to do that with our neighbors and friends. And there's always going to be conflicts, driving down the street, there's going to be conflicts. Walking down the street, there's going to be conflicts. So we have to learn, if we really want a better world, if we really want to do without all these structures, we have to learn how to make this communication happen and take responsibility for our feelings.
Yeah, you hit it right on the head right there. Yeah, absolutely. um, emotional knowledge and communication. And the nonviolent communication document on the screen, for sure, that can be used for everything, just communicating in general, neighbors, community, all that. And this is a must um, in a society of anarchy, for sure. Communication and emotional stability.
I think one other big thing too is, I mean, you started off with know thyself, but beyond just knowing yourself is understanding your value and feeling valuable. You know, I came from a place before I started to understand the concept of freedom fully. I was not as confident as a person as I would have liked to been. And I think that made it more difficult to be in a relationship with me, you know, because I wasn't sure of myself. And I would look to my wife for guidance, or, you know, I would be confused about what I really wanted in life, you know. And I think when people are going through that, it forces the other person to say, hey, you're sucking of my energy, you know. You need to figure
Yeah.
out what you want to do. You need to be strong and confident in who you are. And so I think maybe understanding that people don't understand their true value sometimes is a tool to help deal with a husband or a wife or a friend who's you're having trouble in relationships with. Maybe they don't understand their value.
Oh yeah, I think that's a huge part of it. Absolutely. And the problem, um, especially right now with everything coming up to the surface, people in relationships in general, that when someone doesn't know their value or has the inability to love, what that brings with it is spiritual bankruptcy. They your life force can get drained in a toxic relationship. And I kind of see the pattern during these times where all of these emotions and these issues are coming to the surface. So knowing your value and having self-respect, standing up for yourself, and I don't mean in physical aggressive way, just knowing your value and is extremely important.
And so what people who don't understand their value, what are they probably going to be doing? Excessively drinking, using some substance, using drugs from the doctor to make them feel better because they really don't feel good inside.
Yep.
And if you're regularly having to change yourself every day just to be at home, you know, are you really being you at all?
Yeah. No, absolutely. This is like the corrupt love, right? It's the emptiness, and it holds weight. It can be detrimental to your life work, your path work. Um, so it's a slippery slope, but definitely having self value is definitely self respect. And there, we're kind of touching on all the different degrees of relationships and marriages. So sometimes people have to know when they need to detach from that toxic, um vampiristic relationship.
Right.
It starts jeopardizing your principles, yourself, your mentality. Yeah, it's time to
The abuse
move it on.
cycle will always repeat itself, you know, just like the alcoholic um, who beats his child, and then that child grows up and becomes an alcoholic who beats his child.
Yeah.
And then you have the very common, most relationships, there's the aggressor, the stronger personality, and then the more subservient personality. And it sets up this codependent situation where the softer, gentler one keeps appeasing the more aggressive one. And if people find themselves in one of these scenarios that has built up for so long, a lot of times you're right, there's not always a good end to that. You know, it can't, there's no simple sometimes I think the best for all concerned is to part ways, or part ways for a time,
Yeah, absolutely. Because
and re-come at it from another angle.
you're affected by the karma being in a toxic relationship, because you're off your path. You're going against the grain. That's going to have consequences for yourself as well, on a physical level, on a psychological and spiritual level. You're going to see the degradation in yourself, and it's important, especially when someone is toxic in a way of abusive towards their self, drugs, alcohol. um, it's going to suck you into a dark place. So you got to know when to move on. And in I'm all for the good fight in relationships, when there is um the commitment, like we were talking about. The commitment has to be there, equally. Even if someone is kind of in the dumps in life, there's still that commitment, and that person can change. But when it's straight narcissistic, and um what's that demon that just sucks the life out of people, the succuboo.
Succubus.
Succubus, yes, exactly. I mean,
Right.
that's just a level of consciousness, right, where they're just, it's take. It's that selfishness.
I've
um
met every job I've been in, every place you've gone. I think we've all experienced someone who's sort of an extreme version of that, who doesn't really know how to make themselves feel good. And
mhm.
so what they do is they habitually, unconsciously steal energy from other people in a vampiric way. And sometimes it's people that raise their voice and yell, because I can think of someone right away that does that. You know, they're just feeling low energy. They don't even conscious of what's going on. And they just show up and freak out and yell at somebody because they're in a position where they can get away with that. And everybody just has to kind of suck it up. Right.
Yeah,
And so if you're in a situation like that with someone you live with and who's supposed to be your best, confidant, your most trusted ally, and yet every day they're stealing your energy, you can't let that continue, because that's not good for you or the person that's doing that action. They're never going to recognize or realize their mistake until the person says, "No more stealing my energy. That's
yeah,
enough. It stops now." You know?
definitely.
And
Yeah,
that
and
takes a lot of courage, I think.
it absolutely takes courage, and the suffering will keep continuing until that person comes to a realization of self-respect, and moves on. um um what was I gonna I lost my train of thought. Go
That's
on.
okay. There's so much more that needs to be said on this subject, and I think what we've done in the last hour is done a really good job of kind of laying out on the table a lot of the problems that exist, and a lot of the big words that need to be discussed. And what I'd like to do is meet again in another week, and let's get a little more into some more specifics and details, and maybe we can bring with us some more information to share with folks. Where do we go from here? We know about these problems. So what are the steps we take from here? Maybe we can give people some more tools, like the nonviolent communication,
Mm.
and look at how we spend our time, how that affects things. And I think we definitely need to go a little deeper into the subject.
Yeah, I completely agree. Next, the second part, we can bring some solutions and dive deeper into the psychology of some of these things. And this is an important topic, because there's people going through this, especially in the truth community. And it needs to have, there's got to be that dialogue there. So I'm glad that you brought this topic up, man. This is great.
Yeah, I feel very supported. When I talked to you the other day, I thought what I was going through was so tough. And then I heard your story. And then I heard you tell me a story of someone who's going through something even much worse,
Mhm.
than what I'm going through. And I thought, whoa, that really puts things into perspective. My problems don't seem,
Yeah,
I'm not
and
alone in this issue, and that support, that makes me feel a lot better. It makes me feel like, okay, I can fight this battle. Everybody's fighting it. It's not just me.
yeah, for sure. And that's how we can help each other and support each other, is by communication and dialogue, and putting this on the table. And it is what it is, and let's communicate and talk it out, because there are solutions. So yeah, awesome, brother.
Well, thanks so much. Yeah, I really appreciate you taking this time with me, and I think I know that other people will appreciate it too. So I'll try to get this myself prepared for our next talk. And you have a great week, Will.
Thanks for having me on, Chris. I really appreciate you, brother.
All right, have a great night.
Take care.
All
Gia.
right.
Okay, what are we supposed to do, and what are you going to do?
You have to understand the totality of the big picture, the tapestry of all of this information as it pertains to what's going on in the world and how it affects our lives on a day-to-day basis, and then put it into a format that can be readily understood by other individuals, and then share that information with whoever will accept any part of it. With whoever will accept any part of it.